Hello, welcome to Lunch with Books. The Wheeling Poetry Series is back today. We'll get to that in a moment. I just want to make a couple of announcements. Next week at Lunch with Books on the 20th at noon, Tim Bottos and Shane Hoover, they're reporters at the Canton Repository in Canton, Ohio, and they've created a video series called The Madam Must Die, which is about the Paul Hankish and a prostitute, a madam from Wheeling who was murdered. So it's a true crime series that you can watch online, and they'll tell you all about the making of that series next week. And on November 7th, in partnership with the Wheeling Arts and Cultural Commission, we will present a live stream of the 2020 Upper Ohio Valley Festival of Books, which will celebrate memoir writing with Billy Kahn, who has written In the Shadow of the Valley, and Cassie Chambers, who wrote a book called Hill Women. And Bobby will do a workshop on memoir writing that you can sign up for. There's still a few places left. It's limited to 15 people. Send us an email at lunchwithbooks@yahoo.com to sign up for that. As I mentioned, this is the return of the Wheeling, officially the return of the Wheeling Poetry Series. And the next one will be November 3rd, Election Day. You can see Erin Murphy and get some relief from all the stress of the election on November 3rd. Mark will tell you more about that. The host of our series, as usual, is here with us today. Mark Harshman is the Poet Laureate of West Virginia, and I will turn this over to him. Here's Mark Harshman.
Thank you, Sean. And let me just underscore what Sean said about the next installment of the Wheeling Poetry Series coming up on November 3rd. A wonderful younger writer, Erin Murphy from Penn State, one of the branch campuses, will be with us. And I assure you, she's a marvelous poet, and you will not only enjoy her work, but I'm sure enjoy talking with her afterwards. And my heavens, we will need the relief, won't we, on Election Day? So, but now for today's joy, Allison Pitinii Davis. I am so happy to welcome her here, to welcome you, Allison, as I look at her on the screen with that lovely new motherhood smile, stretches a million miles. Allison Pitinii Davis is the author of Line Study of a Motel Clerk, Baobab Press, 2017, a finalist. There it is on screen, a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award and the Ohio Anna Book Award. And Poppy Seeds, another book, Kent State University Press, winner of the Wick Poetry Chapbook Prize, which is really one of the, if not the most impressive chapbook series in America. Her work has appeared in Best American Poetry, The New Republic, the Academy of American Poets website, and elsewhere. She holds fellowships from Stanford University's Wallace Stegner program, the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, and the Servinghouse Beck Fund for Study at Vilnius Yiddish Institute. Originally from Youngstown, she is a PhD candidate in English and creative writing at the University of Tennessee, where she has served as an editor of Grist, a journal of the literary arts, and she also writes about the intersection of labor, diaspora, and gender in the Rust Belt. Of course, for me, it's especially easy to welcome any poet who adores Charles Reznikoff the way I do. And if you don't know Reznikoff, Allison will second me in telling you to go find him. And she not only likes Reznikoff, but his finest virtues are clearly visible in her terrific poems, succinct nuggets of wisdom expressed beautifully. I think that should be on her next book, don't you? Here is section 4 from the poem Inheritance, as I recall, dedicated to Reznikoff. And the lines go like this: when the thread unravels, run it between your lips. When there isn't thread, invent separation. Double knot the end of every truth. Marvelous. Mind you, Allison also has poems about neighborhood girls watching attacks by the 50-foot woman, how they rise like man-eating zombies, but I'll let her tell you about that. Welcome, please, with your loudest virtual applause, Allison Pitinii Davis.
Thank you, Mark. That was so kind. I think my dad's probably just fainted. And thank you, Sean. Thank you, Ohio County Library. since we moved here. We've been to so many wonderful programs before the pandemic, and I'm really honored to read. I'm really honored to read from Wheeling. As Mark said, I am a new mother. I have a 7-week-old in the other room who's probably about to start screaming at any moment, so hopefully that'll be okay. So I'm going to read about 12 poems. I'm going to read from 3 different kind of sets of poems. The first set of poems is from my collection, Line Study of a Motel Clerk. As Mark mentioned, it's published by Baobab Press, I think in 2017 now, I'm not sure. Again, it's available anywhere online. So I'm going to start with some poems from that book, and then I'm going to move into my manuscript, read some poems about a group of neighborhood girls who work at Northeast Ohio Dairy Queen, and then finish up with some poems about the Rust Belt, including some poems about Wheeling. Right, so these first 3 again are from the book, and they're set at my family's trucking motels. My family in Northeast Ohio has owned a trucking motel for over 60 years now. My grandfather opened it. My dad runs it now. So these are poems from when my dad and my mother were younger and dating. My mother would drive in from Niles, Ohio to North Lima and hang out with my dad in the office. Also, a theme running through these poems are Sohio stations, which did they have Sohio stations in West Virginia? I'm not sure. Maybe. They were like what BP was before the gas station, before they were BP stations. So in these poems, the Sohio station starts out as open, and then as the steel mills close and Youngstown starts falling apart, the Sohio station also closes and gets knocked down. On the drive to the motel, Sohios recede in the side mirrors of her Camaro. Core's neons flick on down the strip. This morning, she lit a candle at St. Demetrius. Above her stretch garlands of tandem phone wires. Her eyeliners drawn by her sisters drawn to the car plate full of money to take home. Where never is heard a discouraging word above the industrial drone. She parks the car and crosses the lot alone. In the gray of Ohio and the gold, she pulls her coat around her in the cold. Aide ashes a cigarette in greeting. It's Friday. The city's engines rev and roam. That poem was about my mother driving to see my dad at work, and in this one, she's there hanging out in the office in late October before Halloween. And they're waiting for the night clerk to come so they can go out and go downtown and have fun. So the motel clerk in these poems is my father. The motel clerk's son. I'm sorry, the motel clerk is my grandfather. The motel clerk's son falls in love while buildings fall. The days are short. His beard is Wolfman length for Halloween. The screen door creaks as truckers etter and squint beneath fluorescents, their pupils enlarged with Midwest night. Keys change hands across the counter, but she's looking out the window, the reflection of her lipstick blurring with moon-streaked gas prices across the street. It's Saturday. They're waiting for the night clerk's headlights to arc the lot, waiting to drive through the South Side harsh with stars, a grainy mid-century sci-fi that starts with a couple necking in a car and ends in a city where everything's over, where mothers yell at buildings to fall already and stop complaining. One more from the book, and this one, it's thinking my dad tells a story of when the steel mills closed. He said I was at the motel staring out the big window off, looking towards the turnpike exit and realizing that like the trucks were slowing down, the gas station across the street was knocked down, like what's gonna happen to the motel, what's happening to Youngstown. This is a poem about kind of that era. In it, I mentioned the construction of 680, the highway that runs through downtown Youngstown, and the idea that across America, a lot of highway construction not only segregated downtowns physically, but also tended to segregate Black areas from downtown and cut business off from them. So kind of systemic racism via construction. So I mentioned that in the middle. The motel clerk's son drives out to check on business. Before him, stickers fade across the bumper. Last one out of town, turn off the lights. The last employer in Youngstown is the weather. The truck behind him plows gray snow to the roadside while another truck lays salt. Over and over, the radio says, "Prevent fuel line freeze up. You go or Sohio pays the tow." The radio signal spans the city, now bisected by 680, runs from the West Side widows prescribed shock treatment after their husbands fell dead on the lines, to the East Side workers who trained their white bosses, then got the slip. He pulls into the motel lot. Business is dead. Inside the office, he stares into the weather hitting the window. A wrecking ball crashed through the Sohio station across the street. What's left of it smiles back without its teeth. He says, "That's what you get for opening your mouth." That's a little taste of the book. Again, most of the book is about just my family's small family businesses running over the course of 60 years. The other side owned a laundry and they were Greek. So it's Jewish motel owners, Greek laundry owners. My parents marry and they make us, and I wrote a book about it. So I hope you check it out. Again, Line Study of a Motel Clerk. The rest of the poems I'm going to read today are from my manuscript, Progress. So this manuscript is based off of Lordstown Syndrome, which is in the 1970 GM Lordstown Strike, again, right outside of Youngstown, Ohio. A lot of workers went on strike because the line was, at that time, the fastest moving production line in the world. So they weren't asking for a raise, they were just asking for more humane working conditions. They couldn't rest. So I have, my manuscript looks at the strike from a few different angles, some documentary poems about the strike itself, but I also wanted this idea of Lordstown Syndrome to kind of be communicated in a way talking about my more contemporary generation, this idea of this kind of ongoing Lordstown Syndrome in Youngstown, Ohio, this idea that people are still kind of on strike for more humane conditions. So in my poem, it's a group of Jewish girls in the Rust Belt who work at a Dairy Queen and go on strike against their manager there. They're also in Youngstown and they're very kind of discontent and bored, so they also develop a crush on the local WKBN meteorologist to pass the time at work. So that's where we start out in this poem. When the neighborhood girls first see the new WKBN meteorologist, the Dairy Queen is dead. We adjust our visors and eye the TV above a table. And now we bring you the local forecast. That was the last time we changed the channel. That was the last time we refilled napkins. Would you believe the heat we're having? Not for the tinsel moonlit above the car lot. Not for the old man demanding sprinkles. He wraps a fist around a pattern forming outside of Ashtabula, and boom, it's broken with our boyfriends. We make blizzards for an entire dance class. The construction crew comes in for conies. This time of year, the heat's a killer. Their orange vests align in orbit. You're watching WKBN First News 11. He runs a palm down downtown Youngstown. One of us sweeps up the back. One of us turns out the lights. We steal our rays and raisinets because we sense the system shifting. His radar picks us up as warnings. This next one, I have the neighborhood girls. They don't make enough money at the Dairy Queen, so they have a bunch of odd jobs on the side. And this one is the ever popular Rust Belt odd job of gathering scrap metal and selling it for money. So in this one, they post an ad that they're gathering scrap metal at their local donut shop, which in Youngstown is Plaza Donuts. I heard Wheeling used to have a good donut shop, but it closed before I got here, so someone should reopen it. I would like to have a donut. This one is called The Neighborhood Girls Gather Scrap Metal to Break Even. I should also say in these poems, the neighborhood girls not only kind of take over the Dairy Queen thematically, in the collection, but they also formally take over each poem. So there's the titles are in third person, like I'm supplying the titles, but then the neighborhood girls jump into the poem in a we voice, and they actually do the talking in the poem. So they take over the poems. So they're taking over the collection thematically as well as formally. So that's why I switch to we when I'm reading the poems. The neighborhood girls gather scrap metal to break even. We don't want much from the Rust Belt, just the parts no one else can use. What we do with them is our sour business. A hint, it's a long summer. See our ad at Plaza Donuts. Inside, a line of men scratch lotto tickets with the corroded heads of presidents. They sit on the bar stools all day. Our Mount Rushmore, yes, and we don't say that lightly. We are what you'd call a growing business. We'll shake this town upside down until it rains lucky money. You will want to watch us. You'll want to run back to your car and grab your umbrella. This next poem, the neighborhood girls are again at their Dairy Queen, and they're counting their tips. So between the lines of the poem, they're counting the money. Oh, downtown do you? Let me also say that in this poem, so in the collection, they talk about their Judaism. I'm Jewish, so I wanted them to be Jewish as well. They talk about pawn shop diamonds. This goes back to my great-grandparents in Youngstown, ran a loan company, and my uncle always tells me crazy stories about it, and I don't know if they're true or not, or if my uncle's watching. Hi, Uncle Barry. But one story is that the diamonds were loan collateral from a prostitute. I don't know. So that kind of gets worked into this poem in a strange way. People ask me about those lines, though, and it's one of those stories. The neighborhood girls split tips after their shift, late May. Oh, downtown do you, one for you. Remember them locking up, our bubbies, one for me. Swallowing homelands, diasporas, two for you. Keys to pawn shop diamonds, two for me. Hawked by hookers trying to get, three for you. Honest, collateral, catastrophe, three for me. Calamity, can you remember, four for you. Our grandmothers, their safety, four for me. Deposit boxes shining, five for you. Bronze with bills, with corn, five for me. With lanes of traffic north, six for you. Generations later, how even, six for me. We split into them. Seven you. How high we stack, seven me. The president's heads. Stacking the money, so they're stacking the president's heads. Get it? Sometimes it's hard to see poems when you hear them. This one, as Mark mentioned, is about the man-eating zombies and the neighborhood girls. I got the idea for this one from an essay by Hugh S. Mannon called Living Dead Spaces, the Desire for the Local in the Films of George Romero. And so Night of the Living Dead, of course, was filmed right outside of Pittsburgh. And so this essay that Hugh Mannon writes is all about how when he was young, his father was like a foreman at a steel mill, and there was a strike. And he remembers being in the car with his father outside of the mill and striking mill workers surrounding his car. And he remembers them like coming towards the car almost like zombies. So he thinks about the zombies in Night of the Living Dead kind of representing disgruntled steel workers, and this dying economy that like kind of won't die, and it just keeps going and going, even after kind of the financial bottom has fallen out. So I like to think about zombies as local, and so the neighborhood girls kind of take on this persona. In this poem, they are again looking at the Dairy Queen, talking to a customer. This poem is a reverse abecedarian, which means that the first line of every line of the poem begins with a letter of the alphabet. It's reversed though, so it goes Z through A, so it's like rising up like a zombie. The epigraph again is from Hugh S. Mannon. The zombies' depurposed, aimless persistence in the films had a special resonance in 1970s Pittsburgh. The neighborhood girls rise like man-eating zombies. Zero in on our alphabet. You'll find yourself worked up like the sunrise over the Rust Belt. Expect us where you least expect us. Art too low to stoop. Veering, we gain a foothold. Unilateral movement. Together, we stagger like the bald man staggers at the dive bar, Cleveland brown shirt pat across his beer belly. Suppose you've seen better, backing your daddy's Chevy down the driveway. Prepare to meet girls like us, who like men rare as you. Quit running. Last week, we took your order at the Dairy Queen, remember? Begged you for a comb boy, but watched you down a Sunday. On your left, that woman blonde enough to stir fury. Nights of reanimation. Mister, did you see her eat that chili dog? Let's just say that something keeps these Rust Belt women hungry. Catch up with your fries. Join us later at the bar. Just past the turnpike, Vindy vendor beneath the awning. It's a place to kill an afternoon. Head over and we'll meet you. Go on, don't you trust us? Forget who we are? Employees of the month. Dig these work visors. High patriotic. Call us sometime. Can we call you baby? Baby, we're hungry for a good time. American abracadabra. So they eat the customer. Long story short of that poem. I'm going to switch over now to a section of the book that's more about the strike itself and the aftermath and the legacy of the strike. So we'll leave the neighborhood girls behind. I'm going to share my screen and share an image real quick. By the way, if anyone would like a copy of the poems themselves, I'm happy to send them. Sometimes it's easier to read than to hear. So a picture from one of the Lordstown strikes, and the poem is about this image. So I'm going to go up and read the poem now. I'm in this section of the manuscript, which is called Lordstown Syndrome. Every title is from a source about the strike itself. So this one is from Jefferson R. Cowie's Staying Alive, the 1970s and the days of the working class, the last days of the working class. So it goes through different strikes. And here's what he said about, here's what Newsweek said about the Lordstown strike. With all the shoulder-length hair, beards, afros, and mod clothing along the line, explained Newsweek of the notorious GM Lordstown plant, it looks for all the world like an industrial Woodstock. So the workforce, kind of like just post-Vietnam, the workforce is very young, demanding different things from management than the generation before them. So again, the photograph I'm referring to is the photograph I showed here. Photograph. A line of workers in bell-bottoms on the GM Lordstown lot. Average age, 24. Their Stetzeled signs, UAW Local 1112 on strike. Sunshine from outer space, glinting off their aviators. The car plant sprawling behind them, like so many morbid Midwests. One with his work shirt unbuttoned and his gut hanging over his waistband. Tells reporters, just had 500,000 Vietnamese trying to kill me. You think I'm scared of GM. Beneath them, their shadows blown leftwards, like grass thrown up to test the wind. This next poem, again, the epigraph is the title. This epigraph is from, if you don't know the work of Sherry Lee Litkin, and you're in the General Rust Belt area, she writes about the literature of deindustrialization. So she's thinking a lot about just the Rust Belt in terms of what people have written about it creatively, and she's a very important scholar to me. So this is from an article she wrote with John Russo called "With GM Job Cuts, Youngstown Faces a New Black Monday." Black Monday, of course, the term they had when the steel mills closed. So the epigraph is November 27th, 2018. GM's announcement that it will shutter its Lordstown plant outside Youngstown, Ohio, is just the latest in a long series of economic blows to the city since the 1970s. This poem is about when I heard that news, which is when I was not living in Ohio, I was living in Knoxville, where my husband was a professor and I was finishing up a PhD. I hear this news in Knoxville in a rented duplex. I'd been away for 5 years after living in Ohio for 25. I see the factory, imagine its endlessness empty. The first time I brought my husband home, he said, "Why do you all drive GMs? In my family, a used Buick, a used Impala, 2 Cavaliers." "No," he explained, "the whole town." Now, between us, we have 2 PhDs and a Prius. In Knoxville, it only snows a few times a year. We just use a CD case to scrape the frost. Our neighbor is an overweight alcoholic with a cat that what's clawed is skunked to death on our lawn. One night, he pounds on our door and gives us an ice scraper, says, "You two are making me sick." True story. Everyone hear me okay and everything? It's so bizarre, as everyone knows, doing these readings on Zoom. I can't see anyone or hear anyone. I assume my dad is there and telling me to slow down. So a lot of poems about labor are very narrative. And I think there's a lot of ethical reasons to do that. If you are, especially if you're not a worker yourself or not doing the labor and you're writing about it, it should be written in such a way that people understand what you're saying. One reason why I wanted to make this book about working a counter job is because I've worked so many of them, worked at so many coffee shops and so many waitressing jobs, that I felt like I had the liberty to really say whatever I want, however I wanted. I also wanted to kind of mess with the stereotype that labor poems can't be experimental. Of course, I'm not the first to do this. I'm thinking of a lot of second generation American Yiddish poets who were both laborers and writing crazy experimental modernist poems. So I wanted to think about how I can also approach the strike from an experimental angle. So in this poem is about something that the GM workers did because the line was so fast, which was called doubling up, where you would work your job and the person's next to your job for half an hour, then you would switch. This way you'd get half an hour break. Otherwise, you would go hours and hours without a break. So the epigraph is from, I forget the title of the book, by Stanley Aronowitz. He did like kind of a anthropological report on Lordstown. He went and interviewed workers. And one worker said, "The only chance to keep from going nuts is to double up on the job. It's the only way to survive the plant." So again, this, of course, you weren't supposed to do this, because if you were doing your work and someone else's, the chance of the quality going down was a lot higher, right? Or the chance of making a mistake. So the workers were doing this for their own safety, not for the line, not for productivity. So what I do in this poem is, one side is a narrative of a worker talking about this process of doubling up. And on the other side of the page, I have the same words as the line before, but I switch them around. So it's as if the lines are doubling up. And the lines stop making sense on the right-hand side of the page because the worker's getting tired. They're doing the work of 2 people. The line's going faster and faster. So the poem itself is trying to enact the act of labor on the auto line. Work a buddy's job half an hour, then you switch. Switch the work, half your hours, buddy your thens. Gives you rest, rest your gives. Otherwise, half-hour lunch with 15 on the either. Either lunch the wise or other the 15. What's a year if you're lucky, the long turn? Longing, longing, turn the luck yearly. Now where was I? Where I now was. You pup some air in the system. The air pups the system in you. Then you reach in there and fuck with the fricatives. Fricatives fuck in the reach of the then. Grease up the glides, sweeten the schwas, schwa the sweets, glides the grease. Where is your eye gear? Don't you value your vision? Where is your vision? Don't you value your eye gear? Are you even listening? Even your listening is. This is the last poem I had planned to read. There's questions after. Happy to answer them. This is from Gary Briner, who was the president of UAW Local 1112 in Lordstown during the strike. And this is an interview actually from Studs Terkel's Working, which is, I'm sure many of you know, the book where Studs Terkel interviews workers about what they do. And it's, maybe the best book ever written. It's really wonderful. But I'd read the book many times, and before I had really started researching the Lordstown Strike, totally kind of realized that it was about Youngstown, but never really realized how amazing it is that he has this document preserved in this book. That's such a famous book. But so Gary Briner, the president, is talking about his father's generation, who also worked, I forget, in a steel mill or in the car plants. He's talking about how the younger generation of Lordstown went on strike because they felt differently about work, about conditions than the previous generation. So he says, father felt patriotic about it. They felt obligated to that guy that gave him a job to do his dirty work. Whereas the young guy believes he has something to say about what he does. So one thing I do in this section of the manuscript is I take a quote that's more male-centric. So this is about, the generations of men working. And I kind of take the idea and apply it to Rust Belt women. And so in this, I'm thinking about sitting in a waiting room in a gynecologist's office, and the impeachment trial was on TV, and it was me, a girl much younger than me, like maybe 10 years, and a much older woman. And so I was thinking about the interactions of our different generations in this waiting room. But really not very much was said, but there was a lot of tension. And this is takes place in Washington, PA, on like a cold gray day. Probably it's sunny here, so hopefully it's not gray where you are. I think that's all you need to know about this one. I'm sitting in the OB/GYN waiting room in Washington, PA, which is in the middle of a fracking boom. The impeachment trial is on TV. NBC, the neutral station. Western PA, Union Democrats, that in 2016 went for Trump. I did not think I'd get to move back home, but then my husband got a tenure track, so here I am, hoping this time to be pregnant. A few chairs over, a young girl is starting to show and holding a child, and in a chair across the room, an older woman. We all have vaginas that need checked. To be, my husband would add, need to be checked. I am from here enough that I am waiting, and from here enough that when the older woman says it, I shut my mouth. A disgrace to drag the president through the mud, she says. It is late fall, indeed muddy, and bleak, the last few leaves clinging to the trees. Curious, I pretend to watch TV, but then the young girl inhales sharply. Well, maybe he had it coming, she says, and reddening, rubs a stain from her child's shirt. It is invisible, yet all the same, it is my turn. Well, I say, trying to sound moderate, he said awfully rude things about women. I feel myself grow dizzy. I try a little something to show I'm local, and I'm from Youngstown. Where are all the jobs? Even Lordstown closed. The young girl perks up. She is also from Youngstown, and her husband just moved here, and she just moved here because her husband lost the job. at a fracking company now. I keep my mouth shut. It's dirty work. I don't like him doing it. You know, she pauses, the environment. I am not saying how easily she could have the advanced degrees, the advanced maternal age, and I could have married young and had my child. I'm not saying that the older woman with her Rust Belt rouge and crucifix, but God. While I'm not saying it, the girl is saying global warming, slowly testing its roundness to make sure we won't laugh. And we don't. We've been waiting here too long. A Democrat on TV really starts going at it. One by one, we're called, where exactly? Back. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. That was perfectly lovely. It's good to hear you reading those fine poems, and I'm sure everybody else felt much the same way. I'm not sure if Sean or Erin are ready to funnel any questions to you, but I'll start with at least one. It's sort of a standard question I have when I'm doing this kind of thing, and that's simply, are there any particular authors you see as having an influence upon your work, past or present, beyond Reznikov, obviously? I know myself, as I hear you read these poems, I can't help but think of Philip Levine, and of course, I think the poet, one of the poets that certainly inherited his mantle is the fine Pittsburgh poet Jim Daniels. So, do you have anything does that suggest something to you?
Yeah, sure. Also, Jack Gilbert from Pittsburgh, someone I think about a lot. A lot of great Pittsburgh poems. The best line he has is, "The only place greater than Pittsburgh is Pittsburgh." For the experimental poems, Harriet Mullen, who's a Black author who thinks a lot about code switching from different kinds of American vernaculars. So she really made me think about switching from kind of this labor language to an experimental language, and how like labor language really is experimental, thinking about just the terminology you have working in a car plant. You know, it's like if you're not from that culture, the language is foreign. So like thinking about the words like doubling up, or, you know, the other terms that I have in the book. So she's someone who helped me think more experimentally. But yeah, really this book is, I thought a lot about music. It's like Chrissie Hynde, thinking about Rust Belt artists who, especially in the Neighborhood Girl section, who are kind of tough.
Good. I didn't expect to hear Chrissie Hynde's name mentioned this morning. That's great.
Yeah, there's a couple poems with Chrissie Hynde in the book. There's also some Philip Roth poems. The Neighborhood Girls also read a lot of Philip Roth in the books. There's a poem where they come home from work and get really drunk reading Philip Roth and think about him. So the Neighborhood Girls are always drunk, unfortunately. They're bad role models. They work hard.
Yes. You're getting great comments here. I can't read and do this at the same time, but
I see one about Quality Bakery in Moundsville has great donuts. Thank you, Christina.
And you and I will have to talk about Green Donuts in South Wheeling, which is the one that you probably heard people telling about that's now gone. Audiences seem to love to have a glimpse into the personal lives of their authors, especially daily work habits. Now, I realize your daily work habits may have radically changed in the last couple of months, but if you'd like to take a try at that, you know, what would a typical day have been, perhaps is the way I should phrase it.
Yeah, well, you know, I've been I have getting a PhD in poetry, so I've been definitely raised in just the workshop model where I had a poem due every week, so I'd write a poem every week. And if it wasn't for those deadlines, you know, I haven't had a really good, you know, writing a lot for myself since probably like undergrad. So, I mean, for a decade. So without the deadlines, I would not be writing that much, period. But I think I really write on momentum. So I won't write for months, and then I'll sit down and write nonstop for a week. So for people who you like writing, but you don't have time, or it's not something you do every day. Some people say if you have, writer's right and you have to sit down every day and do it. Like, I've never been like that. I would love to be like that now with a kid. I'm especially not like that. But I read him a lot of poems. I probably read poetry every day. So I think reading is part of writing, and some people just need a lot of downtime to let the poems percolate.
That's terrific. That's really, well, I would shout to the mountaintops to read to your children, of course.
Read Mark's books to your children.
Bless your heart. Is there a place you like to write? Have you always kept a study where you write, or are you like me? I have a study, but I tend to use it for everything. But I use it for revision, but I don't use it for starting. So these days I'm at the dining room table a lot, unless the weather's really nice, in which case I'm in the backyard underneath a shade tree. But
I'm often writing from a couch or a dining room table. Not really a desk situation. So once I had to was in a PhD program and grading papers and stuff, I do more of the grading at the desk, but the writing tends to not be there.
Right. Sean or Erin, I presume you will interrupt us if you've got a question you want Allison to.
Yeah, the questions come on the comments field, and I can put them on the screen. So far, we've just had wonderful comments. So we'll give it a couple more minutes and see.
Okay. Allison, is there someone you're reading right now that you're especially excited about? Not necessarily a poet, but
I just finished rereading The Assistant by Bernard Malamud, and it's all about this guy owns a small grocery store in New York. He's an immigrant, and he just has bad luck. And it's during the Depression. His grocery store is just running into the ground, and if you run a small business, know someone who does, it's the most accurate book ever written about small businesses I've ever read. But I always wondered, how did he get it so right? It's because, of course, his father grew up running a really down on its luck small grocery store. So he was the child of a small business owner, as am I, as is my father. So Bernard Malamud saw the behind the scenes small business lifestyle. So that's how he got it so right. But it's
Malamud used to be such a big name, and I haven't heard it in years. I heard his name in years. It's a shame. He has quite an impressive body of work, as I recall. So
his short stories are, I think, what he won a Nobel, I think, maybe the book award for the short stories. Sorry, Saul Bellow won the Nobel. I think Malamud deserved it over Saul Bellow even. But the short stories are really where it's at. But The Assistant's very good.
You mentioned Reznikov, and of course that brings to mind all those objectivist poets, which are sometimes lumped together and not necessarily sympathetic ways, but are any of those other writers, which sadly are nearly devoid of women, with the possible exception of Lorene Niedecker. But I think of Oppen and certainly Zhukovsky when I think of Reznikov. Are these writers that were important to you?
I'm sure you know this, Mark, but the funniest thing about the whole objectivist organization is there's an interview, and they asked Reznikov, "Do you consider yourself an objectivist?" And he said, "I was never sure what Zhukovsky even meant by that," which is such a Reznikov answer. He's like, "I don't know what you're even talking about." I like Zhukovsky. Zhukovsky, for people who don't know, is more experimental. And Reznikov is if you want to start reading poetry, start with Charles Reznikov. He is easy to read. He's straightforward. He's trying to communicate in a way that Zhukovsky is much more of a modernist, more confusing, which I love him, but not as much as Reznikov. And Oppen is a little more abstract. I mean, Reznikov is just, of those ones, he's just my favorite. No, the other two can't compete for me. I respect the other two, but.
Oh, good.
Reznikov, also, one more thing that I wanted to mention, especially in this political moment, Reznikov did such a good job documenting just the time period. He wrote a lot of documentary poems, which means he was also trained as a lawyer. So he would read through court cases and then write poems about them. So his poetry is also really documents the civil rights cases of the time and just injustices to immigrants and racial injustices. So he's really a poet who's in his own very quiet way, really engaged with the world around him. So
he certainly elevated found poetry to a level we might never have imagined. I mean, what he does with both the testimonies and with his volume Holocaust is really quite striking. We've had an interesting question. I'll try to, how much did going to used bookstores with your dad help you love writing? That's a question from Murray Davis.
That's a question from my dad. I would say I owe everything to that. And I would not be writing poetry if not for my very kind father.
That's a wonderful memory. We didn't have many bookstores in my part of the farmland, but my dad simply taking me devotedly to the library. I'm sure I wouldn't be sitting here if it weren't for the fact that my parents valued books, and I can see them both reading in the evenings before TV came to Hoosier country. So.
Yeah, in Youngstown.
Thank you, Murray. That's a great question. You've got a great daughter.
We had a place in Youngstown called Twice Love Books, and they closed when I was probably about 15, and I begged them to let me take it over, and they were just like, no, you don't want to take it over. But I had a lot of my books are from there.
I think Sean and Erin, we could probably turn the whole show right now to all the listeners reminiscing about their favorite bookshop.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Make an hour tribute to Allison for having brought this up.
Oh, here's a comment from Erin, by the way. Speaking of Erin.
I love the imagery of the statement about thinking of the local as zombie. Can you expound on that? Oh, yeah. Very good. Very good.
Yeah, it's echoing a little bit. Am I echoing?
No, everything was fine. I don't know. Mark leaned. Maybe that was why, but who knows with these online programs. Oh, look who's here.
Someone wants to say hello. Say hello.
Hello.
My little zombie. The question about zombies?
Yeah. Zombies are local. Erin,
Yeah.
what do you to expand on that?
I'm echoing too.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I don't know.
Is there a way to stop echoing?
Try
Hello?
the cam mic button and see if there's an echo button in there under audio.
Is that any better? Better? I think it's better.
Yes.
Yeah, right there you are, yes.
Okay, so I can send a link somewhere about the essay, but it's an essay by, I'm not sure if it's available online or not. It's from a book. Hugh Manon, so Hugh, H-U-G-H, Manon, M-A-N-O-N, and the essay is called Living Dead Spaces, The Desire for the Local in the Films of George Romero. So basically, again, his premise is just that Night of the Living Dead was filmed outside of Pittsburgh. Actually, I mean, I can go on and on about this. I write my dissertation a lot about this. When the New York Times wrote its review of Night of the Living Dead, which of course is, the most famous zombie film of all time, the New York Times gave it a 4-line review that said, this is a stupid film made by some people in Pittsburgh. Like, that was it. But the fact that they emphasized Pittsburgh was really this, like, zombies are not like, well, zombies, of course, are originally Central American, I believe. So they're, in a way, an appropriated form. But thinking about zombies as being like this kind of Rust Belt invasion up to the coast, and the coast being like, no, we don't want this weird Pittsburgh stuff. And my book is very much, my manuscript is very much about these girls in the Rust Belt working at this Dairy Queen, feeling like, they're stuck in the Rust Belt. They can't get to New York. Feeling very like rejected from the coast, rejected from everywhere. So them identifying with the zombies and identifying with, even and Hugh Manon's idea, rejecting with these striking auto workers with, like, if people aren't going to recognize us and recognize our labor, like, good luck to them. We'll, eat their brains. So his essay is kind of about, his essay also talks about how zombie speech, which is just kind of like, and how my newborn speaks, as being kind of this like Pittsburghese. And my last poem, which I didn't mention when I talk about, there's a part in my last poem where I say, need checked. Of course, the proper English is something needs to be checked.
Right.
Where I grew up, and it's probably how many of you grew up, where it's this long word about grammatically what it's called, but people in this area leave out to be. It's like the dog needs walked, the lawn needs mowed. Like that's all incorrect English, which I didn't know until I was in graduate school teaching English, right? So I was thinking a lot in this manuscript about Rust Belt grammar, how we talk, how we don't talk correctly, and trying to also make that something that the neighborhood girls do very intentionally in the poem as a marker of identity. And the zombies kind of play into that.
Good.
Very good. Have you been to the town where it was filmed?
No, there's also a blob fest somewhere in Pennsylvania I really want to go to. Have you been to the town where it's filmed, Sean?
Oh yeah, I've been to the cemetery and the exact tombstone where they filmed it.
I want to go on the
Romero.
I want to go on the James Wright tour with Mark, and I want to go on the zombie tour with you.
Excellent. Well,
Allison,
thank you very much. That was an excellent reading. And Mark, thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll let you off the hook now. Erin loved your answer. And don't forget, next week, The Madam Must Die. The two reporters will be here to tell you about that. And on November 7th, the Upper High Valley Festival of Books. And before that, on November 3rd, the next installment in the poetry series with Erin Murphy. Thanks, everyone. And thanks again to Allison and Mark. And we'll see you next time.